Welcome to the second session in our Education Connections webinar series supporting newcomer English learners. My name is Lindsay Massoud and I am joined here today again by Anne Hengerer, a consultant with the Center for Applied Linguistics who served as an ESL teacher and resource teacher for over 30 years and has been drawing on that experience to do teacher professional development for over 10 years. We're so delighted to have her with us once again to present this session with us. Thank you, Anne, for being here. We wanted to also extend a warm welcome to all of you who have been with us today, everyone who may have come to the first session as well as anyone who is here for the first time. This is our 22nd Education Connections webinar, and we're thrilled that you could join us. For the session today, we will start with just a brief introduction, reminding you all of Education Connections, Cal's network of teacher leaders, and then we'll hear from Anne. Today we'll hear specifically about some challenges that newcomer students may face, talking about trauma, culture shock, and how teachers can help students deal with some of the things that they experience. And she'll also provide some practical suggestions for supporting literacy development of newcomer students in your classrooms, focusing on building background and close reading. Following the presentation, we'll have some time for questions and answers, so feel free to put those in anytime you have them. You'll see a questions box in the GoToWebinar window. That is where you'll post both your questions, as well as when we do quick writes, you can also post those in the questions box, the same place you'll post your questions. We will also post some polling questions at various times, and you can respond to those as they show up. We invite you to connect with us on Twitter as well. We'll have some staff posting some tweets about the webinar as we go along, and you can join with other educators and Education Connection staff on there as well to further your learning and share some of the ideas that you have about the topic. We wanted to briefly share with you what Education Connections is. It's an initiative of the Center for Applied Linguistics to bring teachers together in a virtual space to share ideas and resources. If you'd like to join and you're not already a member, feel free to go to that link, edconnect.obaverse.net, and join us. We'd love to have you. As a reminder, on the Online Education Connections platform, we do have the recording, and we will have that after the webinar, and a PDF of the PowerPoint and some related resources that will be posted under live events. So we'll now ask a couple of polls to find out who we have with us today. The first is regarding your current position. So are you a general education teacher, an instructional coach or teacher educator, an ESL teacher, an ESL coordinator, or have another role? Okay, so it looks like we have a spread across. We have 35% of you are ELL, ESOL, or bilingual teachers. 27% are ELL, ESOL, or bilingual coordinators or administrators. We have a few instructional coaches or teacher educators with us, and folks who are involved in the education of English learners in other capacities. It's great to have you all with us today. So real quick, also we'd love to find out what grade levels you work with. Pre-K to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12, or cross pre-K 12 or at a college or university. All right, so we have a lot of people crossing the pre-K 12 spectrum, as well as a number of people in pre-K 5, and then some in middle and high school, and 14% at the college or university. So a great spread across grade levels. Now we'll ask you what region of the country you're from, the Northeast, Midwest, Southwest, or outside of the U.S. All right, so it looks like we have, again, a good spread, a bunch of people in the Northeast, closer to where we are. We're here in Washington, D.C., as well as a number of people in the South and some in the Midwest and West as well. Welcome to all of you. We're so glad that you're here. So I will now turn it over to Ann Hengerer to talk about instructional supports for newcomer English learners. Thank you, Ann, so much for being with us.
And thank you, and welcome everybody to the Education Connection's second webinar on supporting English learners. Today I'm going to share with you two sets of objectives. I'm going to share content objectives, which are going to tell us what we're going to do today together, and then the language objectives, which will tell us how we're going to meet the content objectives. So let's read through the content objectives together. At the end of the session, participants will be able to identify the challenges faced by newcomers related to trauma and culture shock, analyze classroom implications and how teachers might address students' needs related to trauma and culture shock, investigate literacy development as it pertains to newcomer students, and finally, demonstrate examples of newcomers' engagement in close reading activities. And now the language objectives, which are going to show us, using the 4 language domains, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, how you're going to respond to our content objectives. So at the end of the sessions, participants will be able to, 1, read about the challenges related to trauma and culture shock that newcomers might be facing, write ideas concerning how teachers' instruction and classroom culture might be supportive for newcomers facing similar challenges, discuss strategies and activities for literacy development for newcomers, and finally, to orally consider some practical examples of facilitating close reading for newcomers. Newcomer students are traditionally defined as students who have been in the host country for less than 1 year and who are receiving educational services in a language other than their home language. And there are 2 prerequisites that are first and foremost necessary for learning, and that is the physical and emotional stability of the newcomers. And absent these 2 forces, little or very little or maybe almost no learning can take place. And the second challenge for newcomers is, in fact, thought of as language acquisition and development so that the students can communicate in their new environment. Beyond the priority of physical and emotional stability and language development, newcomer students often face a host of other challenges when trying to learn how to navigate a new social cultural environment. These challenges add additional layers to the newcomer's experience and can affect their mood, their behavior, and their success in the classroom. Look at these. In addition, food, clothing, customs, new norms for interaction with peers, new norms for interaction with their teachers, different expectations of classroom behavior, different discipline measures. There's a lot for them to adjust to. We know from research that the first days in a new school for newcomers are critical to developing a sense of comfort and confidence in their new academic environment. And for us as teachers or paraeducators or administrators, it is a daunting task for us to address all the issues we've discussed and that all the issues that our students are dealing with without any tools or without the proper tools. So together we're going to look a little bit more into some of these issues of transition that the newcomers face, like the issue of familial separation, trauma related to immigration and culture shock, and then we're going to talk about strategies for working with students who are experiencing these issues. Familial separation is one of the huge factors that many immigrants are going to face. And in fact, research tells us that during the immigration process, 85% of immigrant children have been separated from one or both parents for an extended period of time. And children who are separated from one or both parents are at risk of depression and other mental health disorders. Separation disrupts the family dynamics. In many societies, reliance on extended family is a key cultural facet. So when that's taken away, it's like removing the legs that support them. Emotional and tangible support provided by family can be severed or severely limited by immigration, which can exacerbate stress associated with both immigration and culture shock. Let's talk about the trauma related to immigration, and this really happens in two different ways. Many families and immigrants and newcomers face trauma before they leave their countries. They are living in countries where there is a war or where they are experiencing persecution or natural disasters, and this is the reason they're leaving. And so these refugees are at a higher risk of having survived ongoing distress in their home country, which puts them at a higher risk for mental health issues like depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition to what happens before they leave their countries, many immigrants have experienced trauma as part of their immigration experience. They've experienced human trafficking, abuse, some are victims of rape or of nutritional deprivation, and they face the harsh conditions of transport. In 25% of cases, physical symptoms, in addition to psychological symptoms, are displayed as a result of the trauma. We'd like to recommend for you a book called The Newcomer Student and Educator's Guide to Aid Transitions by Louise Kreuzer. And much of the content that I'm going to present now is drawn from this book. So we highly recommend it. If you look at this graphic comes from her book. And in the center of her graphic organizer, she has the traumatic stress indicators. And she divides those into 4 different kinds: the affective indicators, the physical, the cognitive, and the behavioral. And many of us who work with newcomers are going to witness indicators from maybe all of these domains. Let's look at the affective domain. Newcomers may show depression, signs of depression or anxiety or anger. Physically, their stress is indicated by headaches, fatigue, the inability to sleep, and heightened defense mechanisms. In the cognitive area, we might find that our students are re-experiencing the trauma that they experienced while immigrating. You might see a loss of interest, memory and concentration deficits in school, and negative perceptions. And the behavioral indicators are often what we see in our classrooms. We see students who experience regressive patterns. They withdraw, they talk to themselves, they're clingy, they're agitated, and very often they show signs of delinquency. So they're dealing with an awful lot. Culture shock, in addition to trauma, culture shock is the next thing I'd like to examine. And culture shock is basically elicited by an exposure to social, physical, or cultural elements that are perceived as unfamiliar, unsafe, or unpredictable. And when someone is experiencing culture shock, often their long-held values and life goals may be called into question because they are different from those of the fabric of the host culture. And shock can be characterized as individual manifestations of the human experience at a particular time under a given set of circumstances, as Kreuzer likes to say. If we look, Kreuzer also lists a myriad of symptoms of culture shock. Many of these we're going to see among our students are among the newcomers with whom we work. Homesickness, social withdrawal, perhaps extreme sleepiness. We all have those students who just fall asleep in class. Extreme or prolonged sadness, uncontrollable weepiness, difficulties in concentrating, inability to maintain relationships, often an expressed negativity towards the host nationals, and drastic moods and behavioral and physical changes, and sometimes our students will be frequently absent from school, frequent physical illnesses. Another researcher, Oberg, defines the domains of culture shock in month periods, and he does so using a timeline. And I like the way this has been divided because we can more or less figure out how long each phase is going to last. And Oberg actually defines 4 stages of cultural shock. The first is the honeymoon phase, which starts upon arrival and lasts as long as 3 months perhaps. And this is the period of romanticization. Immigrants are extremely excited. They are in awe and in discovery, and there's not yet no shock or fascination. By 3 months, however, there can be a drastic shift, and the honeymoon phase might disappear to be replaced by the phase called that he calls the negotiation phase, also known as the crisis phase. And this is a time of evaluation where children start to notice how things are different, and they have an internal struggle with the cultural differences that manifest itself as frustration, anxiety, confusion, fear, sadness, detachment, and homesickness. This phase often will last as long as 3 months, perhaps longer. But by 6 months, many newcomers are entering the adjustment phase, where suddenly there's a period of acceptance, a sense of self, an ability to maneuver in the new culture, measurable efficacy in the new environment, and the anxiety and dysfunction that they felt during the negotiation phase tends to fade away. And finally, beginning at 6 months, and actually that stage from 6 months to a year, and then at a year that lasts often as long as the first 5 years that an immigrant is here, you have the stage of mastery, which is the bicultural stage. And here, individuals are able to navigate freely and successfully in the new culture, and self-efficacy is maintained. So let's look at the 2 early domains of culture shock, and that's the honeymoon phase and the negotiation phase. And these are the 2 phases that are the most problematic for us as teachers or educators in working with the newcomers in the classroom. It is during these periods that the newcomers may go through that silent period that we've all experienced with our students. And this is a time with which they refuse to communicate through speech. But even though they're not communicating through speech, they are still acquiring English through more receptive modes. And we as teachers and school personnel should respect this silent period and at the same time try to give newcomers opportunities to engage to the extent that they are willing to participate. At the adjustment domain can actually be characterized by 3 different experiences, and they might happen simultaneously or they might happen sequentially. The first stage, and Kreutzer, this is once again Kreutzer's work, she describes the stage of isolation, and this is where there's disengagement with the host culture. Newcomers may view the host culture environment as harsh and unwelcoming. And isolated individuals might find themselves detached from both their heritage culture and their host culture. Then there is almost the antithesis, the adoption phase, where there's a complete identification with a new culture at the expense of the heritage culture. And many of our students, we might notice, they might reject their home customs, their dress, their language. And this is when you tend to find their parents at your classroom door. And finally, there is the stage of integration, where a newcomer has a full and healthy assimilation into the new culture without the loss of the old. And now the newcomer can recognize the positive attributes of both the home and the host cultures and can navigate each with relative ease. And integrated individuals are likely to experience a sense of well-being. So we're going to ask you now to participate in a quick write. We're going to ask you to put yourself in your newcomer student shoes and imagine that you've left your home country to live somewhere else. And you've possibly left your home country because of a difficult situation that was occurring in that country. And you can focus on one or two or both of the following guided questions. What do you think would be the most difficult for you if you were a newcomer in another country? Or what do you think you would need most from the people around you? For the example, your teachers and the staff at your school as you transition to living in a new country. So please post your responses in the questions box within the GoToWebinar window. One very interesting response talks about the fact that this timeline is not necessarily set in stone. We might find newcomers experiencing difficulties much longer than that timeline that I used for you. One person mentioned a sense of belonging, which cycles back to what we said, that those first few days that a newcomer is within our school classroom, just being able to feel a sense of belonging is crucial. Of course, a lot of you have focused on the difficulty of understanding language. Somebody mentioned that friendliness from others is very helpful. Friendliness from the adults in the room, but also having a classroom culture where the students are friendly and helpful to one another. One person mentioned communicating their distress, and we're going to get to that. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a perfect segue to what we're going to be doing next. So now, what do we do about all of this? We know that our students have experienced, they've experienced culture shock, they've experienced trauma, they've experienced familial separation. So how can we help them handle these stresses that they have faced? Let's talk about ways that we can mitigate culture shock and trauma for our newcomers. One thing we can do is to make an effort, not just we as teachers, but all the kids in the class, to learn about the newcomers' cultures, to invite them to share their knowledge, to integrate their cultural backgrounds into our classroom routines. Intentional and positive interaction between teachers and newcomers. For example, a friendly daily greeting can go such a long way. If we make an effort to learn how to say welcome or hello in our newcomers' native language and greet them at the door with that, it goes a very long way. Teach them, and someone mentioned this just in the quick write, teach the newcomer about the different stages of culture shock, to give them a sense that what they're experiencing is common, they're not the only ones, and to give them a sense of control, that this phase too will end. And encourage interaction with other students through a buddy system. Of course, in a perfect world, if you have a speaker of that child's language, you could buddy them up, but very often we don't. So we find the kind, sympathetic, and empathetic child to be the newcomer's buddy. In webinar 1, we talked a lot about using the first language in the classroom. So here's another opportunity where we can encourage native language use. We can allow our newcomers to translate words into their native language so that they might engage with the material that they're being presented. We can allow newcomers to write their responses in their first language. They might not yet be able to do it in English, but they might be able to do it in their first language. Create a print-rich environment. For example, label furniture that acts as vocabulary support or word walls in the classroom. Allow time for reflection. Teach students the vocabulary for feelings. Let them journal about what they're feeling. Are they feeling sad? Are they feeling empowered? And give them the opportunity to compare and contrast their life in their new country with their life in their old. And most importantly, periodically remind newcomers and their families that there is help to be had. Make sure everyone knows what the school resources are, like translation services, counseling services, or other social services, so that the students and their families have some place that they can go for help. Let's now focus on literacy development for the newcomers. And I'd like to talk first about building background. And the question I'm asking is, why is it important to build background? And as with ourselves, our students' prior experiences, which are embedded in their own particular cultural and linguistic context, provide a basis for them understanding and interacting with the texts or the concepts that we're teaching them. So students from different backgrounds are going to have varying levels of familiarity with text types, as well as the content conveyed in a text, including events, people, historical contexts, and the activities in which the characters are participating. Some of the events or people might be unfamiliar to them, or the historical context. Comprehension of a text relies on the assumption that the reader already has a prior knowledge and experience so that he can understand what the author is trying to communicate. I'm going to give you a minute to read this text. It's a 7th grade text, and after you have read it, I'd like you, having put yourself now in your newcomer shoes, I want you to write any reflections as to what your experience was like in reading this text. Were you able to deconstruct it at all? Was there anything familiar in it? And write your reflections in the question box within the Go To webinar window. Somebody just said, I recognize the colors. It's so nice when you can grab onto something that you actually recognize. I was familiar with some words, but not enough to make meaning of the overall text. The use of cognates helped. Crayons is a cognate. And somebody said, I actually speak Spanish at a fairly advanced level, and this was easier for me, much easier than for someone who had never encountered those words. Oh, interesting. Somebody said, I also stopped reading a few lines in because I wasn't comprehending. And this is exactly what we're going to encounter with our students. And we're going to give you some strategies to help them comprehend, but that's a great comment. Okay, we'd like to present a way of actually, we're talking about building background. What do our students know, or what background knowledge do they come with? And one way that we can figure it out is by giving our students something called an anticipation guide, and they're often called anticipatory sets. And in just a minute, I'm going to show you two examples of an anticipation guide, but you'll see that these guides provide students with an opportunity to preview concepts and academic language that will be encountered in the lesson or the text that they're about to study. And they can agree or disagree. They can say true, false, yes, no, but they can also demonstrate what they may actually know about a topic before it is formally introduced. So let's look at the first anticipation guide together. Oh, before we do that, we'll talk about the fact that anticipation guides are actually helpful to both teachers and students. In the first two bullets, it's the teachers who benefit. You're able to assess prior knowledge of what the students actually know, and you can provide links with what you're about to teach to the things they already do know. The second two links help the student. It guides the students in making a connection between their past learning and their experiencing new concepts. It also allows them to preview the concept before it's taught and to see actually the academic vocabulary that they're going to encounter in the lesson. And for both teacher and student, these guides encourage critical thinking, and because they are done in partners or in table groups, they promote discussion and peer-to-peer interaction. So let's look together at the first guide. This first guide is a guide about the topic that is going to be taught is global warming. And you can see that the guide is divided into three columns: a before reading or a before discussion column, a set of statements, and then an after reading column. So a student will work with a pair or with a partner and read the first sentence. The Earth is showing many signs of climate change. And before they've even studied about climate change, they have a chance to discuss it together and circle true or false. Maybe they've heard of it, maybe they haven't. Then after they study about climate change, they can go on and check their answers. Were they correct, or did they want to change what they thought? If you look at the second statement, this is a good example of academic vocabulary that they might encounter. The Arctic is not yet affected by global warming. They might not know what the Arctic is. You could scaffold that by putting a map up. They might not know what global warming is. The third one, coral reefs. What are coral reefs? So this is an example of a before and after anticipation guide. The next example you're going to see is called a predictogram. And this is basically a word bank. And in this case, we have scaffolded the word bank using visuals. So tenement, and you see a picture of a tenement. And Little Italy, you see a picture of Little Italy. And it is the student's job to work with a partner, and they're going to go through the word bank, and they're going to place them, they're going to sort them into what they think is the proper column. For example, tenement. Is tenement a setting? Is tenement a character? Is it a problem? Is it a solution? So they do this before they read Pepe the Lamplighter, and then afterwards they can go back and check what they wrote. I'd like to call your attention to the website on the slide. This is a SciAP. You can find this lesson plan actually at cal.org, SciAP lesson plans. And this is a good example, another good example of a type of anticipation guide so you can see that the students have a chance. They might not know the story of Pepe the Lamplighter, but they certainly probably understand happy and sad and scared of the dark, perhaps. Okay, what we'd like you to do now is to just write down one quick idea you would like to implement in your classroom to better support your newcomer students in assessing text. And this can be something we've talked about, or certainly we'd love to hear what you do in your own classrooms, and I can share those as they come in. Somebody said, I love the idea of having them categorize the new vocabulary. And it's particularly good if they're doing it collaboratively, because then they're using the new vocabulary as well. Pre-teach the vocabulary. Good point. This webinar seems like a nice introduction for new staff. Yes, many of our teachers are coming into our schools with no experience whatsoever in working with English learners. So any PD we can give them would be great. We actually use all of these things already. Great. I like this idea, having a newcomer teach their native language word for an object with an English partner and vice versa. It's a great way to give credence to the newcomer's language and to make him or her feel as a part of the class. Oh, I like this. I have students translate vocabulary words in their home languages for their classmates. It validates all languages. Okay, let's talk a little bit about literacy and literacy development for newcomers and close readings. We all realize that that skilled reading requires two things. It requires skill in decoding and skill in comprehension. So literacy, or the reading ability, can only be found in the presence of both decoding and comprehension. Both are necessary, and neither alone is sufficient. And we've all had students who decode fluidly, and then suddenly we ask them what it's about, and they really don't understand. So the decoding piece is there without the comprehension piece. So we actively construct meaning ourselves by drawing on the text, the oral or written text, and from our own background knowledge. And it is only, research tells us, it is only when these two sources of input interweave that the reading will make sense. So how do we build background for close reading? That, of course, depends on the language proficiency level of our students, of our newcomer students. So for those of you who are actually teaching in states where the WIDA test is given as to determine English level proficiency, you will see that there are 6 different levels, and the WIDA consortium gives us can-do descriptors. We know what these levels can do. If you're not in a WIDA state, you all certainly have tests that identify your students as beginners, intermediate, and advanced speakers of English. So let's look and see what we can do with the beginning level, those newcomers who speak very little, if any, English. And so these are the students that are going to need to know what the text is about if they're going to understand it. And in a perfect world, we would use a text that represents knowledge or experiences they are familiar with in their first language. But very often, this is not the case. And when they're not familiar, let's let them preview it in their first language before they read the text in English, and then allow them to summarize that text in their first language. We can, before they even tackle the text, we can provide a summary and discuss it before they read. So basically, we walk backwards with them. They give them the summary and they walk back in the text and try to find the details that support what the summary is about. And of course, we can provide photographs, illustrations, and short video clips to help them. Now, when we get to the intermediate and advanced level English learners, we need to scaffold their text somewhat, but we also want to make these kids independent learners. That's our goal, is to gradually remove the scaffolds and to make them independent learners. But we have to be, of course, aware that many English learners need background that American students, kids who've come through U.S. schools, already know. So let's look at some of the examples here. If they're going to read the Gettysburg Address, what background do they need to know? Well, your American students will know that there was a Civil War and that the South threatened to secede the nation. And Lincoln's address focuses on this. If they're going to read a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they need to know about the civil rights struggle in this country and the struggle for equality and equal rights. The same with Cesar Chavez. And if they're going to read Number the Stars, a novel which seems to be read in all schools, they're going to need to know some background about World War II, the Holocaust, and the Nazis. So, how do we provide background without giving away the entire text? So, once again, if we can, we provide a text where the students have prior knowledge and experience. But if they don't, we can provide them with supplementary texts, and these can be in English or in their native language. We can show them pictures, photographs, illustrations. We can show short video clips, and we'll get to that in a moment. And we can have our students pre-investigate selective websites, pre-selected websites selected by us. So let's talk about video clips. Now that so many of us have smart boards and we're access to YouTube perhaps, we're able to show video clips to support what it is we're teaching. But there's a way that will help the newcomer be able to use that video guide to their advantage. The first thing we could do is to give the students a set of questions about the video before they see the video. Review these questions with the students so they know what they're looking for. Also, review the questions, review the key vocabulary, pre-teach the vocabulary, as you've all said, that they're going to encounter. The first time through, and this is why it's important that the video clip not be too long, let the student watch the clip in its entirety. Don't have them answer questions quite yet, because we all know that the minute they start answering questions, they're no longer watching the video or listening. So let them watch it. Then they can watch it a second time and work with a partner, and they can answer the questions together. And this is a way for you to pair your students strategically. They can be same language pairings, homogeneous pairings, heterogeneous pairings. You can provide a scaffold for the students at the lower levels by giving them a cloze, a C-L-O-Z-E sentence, and a word bank. So they take the words from the word bank, fill them in the sentences, and they will have the answers to the question. Of course, we're going to need to pause the video at intervals, rewind it as the students need more time to process what they hear, and at the very end, we can review the questions and answers when we're finished. Another way for students to respond to a reading is to allow them to use a double entry journal. And let's say, for example, they're studying funeral habits around the world, and one question they might have is what happens when a person dies in Mexico. Of course, if your student is Mexican, He or she can answer from their own experience, but the rest of us are going to need to look at the text to answer that question, but we can write that response in the column on the right, and we can discuss this with a partner, with a table group before we actually write. We have some more books to recommend to you in addition to Kreuser's book. The second one is First Days, Engaging Newcomer ELLs in the Classroom Community. How to Support Refugee Students in the ELL Classroom. Social and Emotional Supports for Newcomer Students. And How to Help Students Survive Culture Shock. Before we open it up for questions and answers, let's see if we've met our objectives for today. So as you scroll through these, give yourself a thumbs up if you feel like we've met the objectives. At the end of the session, participants will be able to identify the challenges faced by newcomers related to trauma and culture shock. Did we analyze classroom implications and how teachers might address students' need related to trauma and culture shock? Did we investigate literacy development as it pertains to newcomer students? And did we demonstrate examples of newcomers' engagement in close reading activities? Let's see if we've met our language objectives. Did we read about the challenges related to trauma and culture shock that newcomers might be facing? Did we write ideas concerning how teachers' instruction and classroom culture might be supported for newcomers facing similar challenges? Did we discuss strategies and activities for literacy development for newcomers? And did we orally consider some practical examples of facilitating close reading for newcomers? We'd like to give you an opportunity to submit your questions in the questions box within the GoToWebinar. Suggestions are welcome as well, and we will share with you as many as we have time for. Oh, here's another suggestion of a great new book by Judy O'Loughlin and Brenda Custodio, Students with Interrupted Formal Education, Bridging Where They Are and What They Need. And yes, many of our students are SLIFE, students with limited or formal education or interrupted education, and their needs are going to be extreme. So it's a great resource to have. Thank you. Oh, somebody asked the question, do you know any great books or other resources that address practical strategies for building literacy in SLIFE students ages 4 to 14? So let me repeat what was suggested by Stacy, a great new book by Judy O'Loughlin and Brendan Custodio, Students with Interrupted Formal Education, Bridging Where They Are and What They Need. And it looks like the website here is us.corwin.com/en-us.
We'll post the link for you all so you can see that. We'll post that in the chat box so everyone can see that link.
Yeah, someone said this book is available on Amazon as well. Yeah, one person brought up a very good point that the scaffold that students need don't necessarily depend only on the newcomers. Many of the American students need these same scaffolds, and it depends entirely on their English language proficiency. It's a good point. Oh, here's one. This is helpful. You might want to relook at the slide that talks about the students in their silent period. Let's see, the fact that the student refuses to answer, that's probably they're not refusing, they're just unable to. Is it appropriate to use picture books with newcomers who are 14 to 20 to help build literacy? Visuals are always a powerful, powerful tool and not too infantile at all. Yeah, this is a great question. As an ESL teacher, how can I best help the regular classroom teachers amp up their literacy instruction for newcomers and or all ELL students? And of course, the cultures in our schools are all different. Some of the ESL teachers push in, others pull out. Very often there's not enough time even to co-plan with the mainstream teacher. In a perfect world, the ESL teacher and the mainstream teacher co-teach and they co-plan and they work together to support the students, but I realize that this is not always possible. So we have to do the best we can and communicate the best we can. The slides will be made, you'll be given an email, sent an email when the slides are available, is that?
So the slides will be available. You can log on to Education Connections at edconnect.oberverse.net. We can repost that link. That site, you do have to create an account, but it's free, and you'll get access to other resources as well. If you have any trouble or you have questions or you'd like them to be posted a different way, you can feel free to email us at edconnect@cal.org, and we'd be happy to help you out.
Is there a certificate available? Do they get a certificate? Can they get a certificate? That's one question.
Yeah, someone asked if they could get a certificate. We don't automatically create something, but sometimes someone has a specific request and we can confirm, provide what you need to provide to your district if that's what you're looking for. Some confirmation that you attended. We can work with you to do that. Again, you can email us at edconnect@cal.org.
Where to find books in first languages? Any good websites? I've always been so fortunate to work in schools where the media center specialist or the librarian was a tremendous resource. But if this would be a wonderful thing to share with one another if you are aware of any good websites of books in students' first languages. I have a woman with whom at a farmer's market who sells books in the first language, but I could actually get that information from her and pass it on to you. As an elementary school teacher, English EL teacher, I find my students often have limited literacy in their first language. Is there a resource you could recommend to have students answer prompts orally that would translate? I think that just even if they answer you in their first language, you can reinforce that by repeating in English what you assume they have just said. There's all sorts of translation devices, but those are often not ideal. So I think just going with the flow, they answer and you can repeat what the answer is in English, and I think that's a very good way to validate their language and to make sure that they get the answer. This is a question that is tossed about all the time. What do you think is most ideal? Push in or push out for instruction of our English learners? And of course, that depends very much on your district. It often depends on the principal in your school, the administrators, your superintendent. In some cases, ESL teachers like to pull out because they can work with their students in groups. But of course, those students are part of the whole class, and when they're pulled out, they're missing instruction. So if you can push in and have enough communication with the mainstream teachers so that you're on the same, you know what's going on and you know how to help your students, you can be a help to all the students in that room. Oh, I like this too. We could try to get native language parents, volunteers, guests, teacher assistants into the classrooms, working on getting multilingual ESL certified teachers as well. Yes, parents can be a wonderful source, and in many cases the culture is not, they don't often volunteer to come into the schools. That's not something they're used to, but if they're invited and they can come and participate and help make bilingual signs or help the students, they could be help the students who speak their languages. It would be a tremendous help in the classroom. Oh, here's another site that we can post for you. A great online reading source for kids, free to register, books in many languages, and of course also in English. It's called the International Children's Digital Library. It promotes tolerance and respect for diverse cultures by providing access to the best children's literature from around the world. It includes 4,619 books in 59 languages. So thank you for that, and that's certainly something we will post for you to get that website. And somebody seconds that. Wow, thank you for that site.
Okay, well, it looks like the questions have slowed down, so I think we will wrap up. We have just a couple minutes to 3 anyway. So I'd just like to send another huge thanks to Anne for sharing your expertise with us and for answering these questions and moderating the session for us. We really appreciate it and are so grateful for your sharing all of your experience and advice with us today. And thank you all of you for spending some time with us. We know you're into the summer now, so we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And we're so thankful for all of your suggestions too. A lot of really great suggestions from you all. So thank you for all that you do on behalf of English learners and for sharing some of that with us this afternoon. We'd like to send an invitation to join us for the last session in this series. It's July 12th, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time once again. We also wanted to mention that the Center for Applied Linguistics will be hosting an institute in Washington, D.C. about newcomer students on August 8th to 9th. So if you're interested in that, you can go to www.cal.org for more information. Feel free to connect with us at connect@cal.org if you have questions or any follow-up, as well as on education connections at edconnect.oberverse.net. Thank you again. Hope you have a great rest of your day.